Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of React Roundup. I am your host today, TJ Van Tol, and with me on the panel, I have Paige Niedringhaus.
Hey everyone.
And Jack Harrington.
Hello there.
And our special guest today is Alex Olivier. Alex, welcome to the show.
Hi, very happy to be here.
So Alex, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about who you are, what you do, why you're famous, all those great sort of things.
I think not sure famous is the right word. But yeah, I'm Alex Olivier. I am a product lead at a company called Cerbos. We are an open source solution for implementing roles and permissions inside of your software applications. My background has been in software development, mainly in B2B SaaS businesses. And this is a problem that keeps coming up over and over and over. So we decided to solve it once and for all.
Excellent. So a nice, small, and easy topic that we can cover pretty quickly.
Hey folks, this is Charles Maxwood. I've been talking to a whole bunch of people that want to update their resume and find a better job. And I figure, well, why not just share my resume? So if you go to topenddevs.com/resume, enter your name and email address, then you'll get a copy of the resume that I use, that I've used through freelancing, through most of my career, as I've kind of refined it and tweaked it to get me the jobs that I want. Like I said, topenddevs.com/resume will get you that. And you can just kind of use the formatting. It comes in Word and Pages formats, and you can just fill it in from there.
Now, I love this because it's one of those features that almost any application needs, right? I mean, who is building serious apps without some sort of user authentication and such? So why don't you start by just explaining, like, I know you want to talk a little bit about authentication versus authorization, but maybe you could just start by explaining the basics, right? Like, what are your options today? If I need user management for my web application, like, what am I commonly doing today? What are my options? Maybe you could walk through some of the basics to start us off.
Yeah, absolutely. So you think of a typical web application, you want to have users log in, they want to be able to do various things inside of your system, and you want to do that in a secure and sort of trusted way of doing things. So we're in a world where today authentication with an N is relatively a solved problem. You have the likes of Auth0, you have Firebase authentication, login with Google, GitHub, that whole world, OAuth 2, wonderful. There's very little reason these days no reason for you to go and run your own database that has a username and password table. Like, that's just not really a thing you really have to worry about anymore. And there's a whole load of risk you essentially get to take off your book and off your plate by using a service that specializes in that. But once someone's actually inside an application, there's actually this whole nother set of business logic around, like, okay, this person's in, but what can they actually do? Should they be able to submit that pull request? Should they be able to comment on this? Should they be able to flag a message? And these kind of business level actions, and that's authorization. So you know who they are, but can they actually do a thing? Should they be allowed to go and do some particular action? And if you look at sort of traditionally in a kind of typical web API type system, you'll have a request come in, you have some authenticated session, you have a JWT or a cookie or something like that where you know who the user is. Then you probably have your own sort of user profile database inside of your system, which contains, they're an admin or they're a user, they're in this team, they're in this office, they have this quota, these kind of attributes or sort of directory profile information. And there's solutions for that. You may, legacy systems, you think like LDAP, Azure Active Directory. Nowadays, you might just have your own database. And then the final step is, okay, using all that context, plus the actual thing they're trying to access. If they're trying to submit an expense, the attributes about the particular expense they're interacting with, you would then end up with hard coding your business logic. So you should be able to approve an expense if you're in the finance team, and it's less than $5,000, let's say. You'd end up writing an if statement or a case switch set of logic to go and decide based on the user and the resource whether they should be able to do the thing or not. And that, for a basic application, is pretty easy to go and implement. Simple if statement, job done. As you start scaling up, you have lots of different resources, lots of different actions that are possible. You're going to end up repeating that code all over the place. So it goes against the whole dry principles. And that business logic is going to get more and more complex. If you kind of imagine scaling up and you're now in a world of like microservices and things are going really well and you're having very distributed, you end up thinking special services and special languages because they're better fitted. You might have your APIs in Node, you might have a recommendation model in Python, you might have some legacy system in .NET. Whenever this business logic changes around who should be allowed to do what, whenever the authorization logic changes, you're now going to have to go and take what is probably on a spreadsheet or in a Jira ticket or something like that, and go and rewrite that logic in a number of languages and redeploy your whole application. So that, at the crux of it, that business logic, that authorization is the area that Cerbos is we're trying to solve using Cerbos as the open source project to kind of do that as a drop-in replacement. So you don't have to hard code all that business logic and essentially decouple it from your application.
So is this something that I would work with on my server or on my client or both? Or how is this all fitting together?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you kind of step back a bit and look at what I think has been a really big shift in application architecture, especially recently, so this sort of decoupling of components into specialized services. So, if you go way, way back, when you started building an application, you would have to worry about designing your own database because there wasn't an off-the-shelf database system to do.
Right. Yeah.
You're now worried about like how you store data in flat files and all that sort of fun stuff. That got sort of taken out. You end up with SQL Server, MySQL, MariaDB, Postgres, etc. Off-the-shelf solution, specialized, good for the job, plug it in, off you go. Go back about 5-10 years, you do the same with authentication. So before you wrote that username and password table, nowadays you go and plug in Okta, Auth0, Firebase, or Google, whatever. Mm-hmm. And this kind of decoupling of specialized services, same with metrics, same with logging, same with request tracing, observability. There's plugged in things and very much accelerated by Kubernetes and sidecars and all this kind of the modern stack, as it were. And Cerbos is one of those. So Cerbos is a standalone service you run inside your system. So you run it on your server. If you're in Kubernetes, you can run it as a sidecar. If you're in just running bare metal VMs, you can just stick the binary on there and run it. If you're in Lambda, you can run it in a Lambda function. And so Cerbos is a service that's inside your network. So you're going to have extremely low latency for doing these authorization checks. So in your code, where you would have had that complicated if-else style statement to work out who can do what, you now replace all of that business logic with a single call out to that Cerbos instance. And you say to the Cerbos instance, I have this user or principal, because it could be an API key, it could be a service token, whatever, has these attributes. They're an admin, they're in this team, they're in this office, trying to do X action on this resource. It's a expense resource. It's from this office. It's of this amount for this supplier. And that Cerbos instance replies with a very simple Boolean, allow or deny. So in your code base, it's now a single if statement to work out whether an action should be allowed or not. Now, the beauty of having this standalone kind of instance inside your system that's doing this and that single point to work out whether an action should be allowed or not is you're now going to get a consistent answer regardless of where in your stack you're doing these checks from. So it could be in your front end service, it could be in your backend for your API, it could be calling it from some async worker, it could be calling it from some batch job somewhere. Wherever these checks are, regardless of what language, they're going through a single point and you're going to get a consistent answer. The beauty of that is twofold. One is when you update the business logic for that Cerbos instance for when the rules have changed, there's one place to update it, and you do that through policy configuration files. And when that change is made, all the tests pass, etc., all your services and all your systems get updated at the same time, and there's no need, you don't need to touch your application code. You're going to get that update propagated essentially out, and you're going to start serving based on the new permissioning logic without any work. And the side advantage is if you're in an environment that has quite strict rules around audit logging, access controls, regulated industries. About a big chunk of Cerbos users today are in fintech and insurance tech. Because there's one point where the decisions are being made, you're going to get a clean and consistent audit log. This time, this principal tried to do this action on this resource, and it was either allowed or denied. And so that's the problem that I personally had to solve a dozen times over my career thus far, both as an engineer and as a product person. And we're now, every time we're like, why the hell are we building this system again?
Right.
Hence, we weren't like, let's go and solve this once and for all. And that's what Cerbos is. Again, completely open source, Apache 2 license, grab it off GitHub, plug in and get going.
Okay, so how do you tell Cerbos what the rules are for your particular organization? Because that's what I'm really interested in.
That's what I was going to ask too.
I have built... I've worked on teams where we've built our own custom authentication, and it is a nightmare, just as you said. There's so many edge cases that always end up being real pains. So how do you tell Cerbos these are the rules or update it once you've got some rules in it? Yeah.
So mine and the rest of our team's background is from running very large, distributed, high throughput, low latency systems, sort of like 25 billion requests a second a day. Was kind of the scale we were running at in our previous companies, and so we got kind of familiar with the modern sort of cloud native tech stack, where you're scalable, Kubernetes, serverless, stateless architectures, these kind of things. And one of the principles that is kind of very much in that world is like the whole GitOps motion, where if you look at your Kubernetes configuration, for example, you define manifests in a Git repo. That's your source of truth, and you change your deployment options. Your cluster picks that up, and suddenly your cluster goes through a reconciliation loop, and everything's now kind of synchronized. So we really like that pattern because it gives you that that again, sort of like audit log of that change history, a single source of truth. And we're applying that to authorization. So the way you define this business logic is through defining Cerbos policies. And these are YAML files. They'll look very familiar to Kubernetes manifests if you're used to those. Good developers copy, great developers paste. I think that's the Scott Hanselman quote. And so that format, and that there's a really nice tool chain around that today. So you define this business logic as a policy, and your policies state here are the different resource types. So if you're building like an HR system, you might have an employee resource, you might have a department resource, you might have a salary resource, you might have a insurance resource. You define all the different actions in this YAML format. So create, read, update, delete are the typical ones, but it's open-ended. So you can have very business-specific actions. So approve, deny, comment, flag. It's open-ended to define how you want. And for each of those actions, you define what the conditions are. So to do this action, you must have this particular role. And to do another action, you might have another particular role. And for basic, what's traditionally known as RBAC, role-based access control, that's really all you need to define. So for this action, you must have this role. And that Cerbos instance, when the request comes in, will check whether that user has a role or not. And that's kind of the base. In reality, though, even if you think you're doing RBAC, generally things are much more detailed than that. And there's another layer where you're starting to actually check the value of attributes.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. I mean, can you do your $500 expense approval in this?
Exactly. So this is really, where Cerbos kind of is focusing, which is ABAC, attribute-based access control. So as well as defining, you must have this role, or you must have this wildcard, or you have a particular role, you can also start defining conditions. And the way you define conditions is through an expression language. It's called Common Expression Language. It's a Google open source way of defining essentially Boolean logic. Huh. It's a great library, super performant. Cerbos itself is written in Go, and it's a Go library. And with these Cerbos policies, you can define all these conditions must be matched, or one of these conditions must be matched, or a subset of the conditions must be matched. And you can do very kind of and/or type structure around the conditions. Then the conditions themselves are referencing either attributes about the principal, so the user or the token making the request, and the resource. So the particular expense you're trying to look at, it has an attribute called amount. And inside of those conditions in your policies, you're essentially comparing and doing Boolean logic on those values. So you would say something like the principal ID must not equal the owner ID of a resource. And you can write that out in pretty much prose, because it's a very sort of structured and sort of clean way of defining it. And then that's your policy files, and you can kind of keep evolving and changing that over time. One thing you need to obviously be careful of when you define as business logic is making sure you've caught sort of all the edge cases. So one of the bits of tooling that's available is you can actually write unit tests against Cerbos policies. So you can essentially do test-driven development for authorization logic, which if this logic was encoded in your application would be a bit of a nightmare, because you're going to have to worry about instrumenting and orchestrating the rest of your application before you can even get down to testing that bit. By having your authorization logic standalone and defined in these policy files using the Cerbos sort of framework that we give you, you get full test-driven development. So you give it example users, example principles, and it does full matrix testing of every single combination of user, resource, and action, and making sure that the results are as you expect. And then you can plug that into your CI pipeline, GitHub Actions, etc.
That's pretty cool.
Any changes are as you expect before they get rolled out. And going back to the whole kind of GitOps workflow, you've made your change, it hits what you need, it gets merged into the main branch. And then those Cerbos instances that are running inside of your stack are getting notified from the Git repo that there's a new update available, and it will pull it down and start serving based upon that, as you would with sort of typical CI/CD pipeline.
So I kind of want to back up for just a second and make sure I understood some of how this works. So you had said that the actual sort of business logic, the core like sort of underlying policies are defined by these sort of manifest files, right? So I'm going to pose you a specific example just because I'm just trying to think through this. So let's say I'm building a system where certain people on the sales team can approve expense reports, right? And so I might have a manifest that's like these 4 people at the company, these 4 users are allowed to do it. And then, new person joins, new salesperson on the team, and they're allowed to approve expense reports. If I wanted to add that role to them, am I like manually editing a manifest? Am I building like a UI around this? So like my sales director can go in and add the new person themselves. Like, do you have like APIs for like modifying this? I'm just sort of trying to paint a picture of what this would look like sort of in a real deployment.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to kind of that user directory type structure, which sort of every application has, be it a profile, database, those kind of things. That's where you have those attributes. So this person is a sales director, this person is in the sales team, this person looks after XYZ region, let's say. And that's kind of all metadata that's about the user that's in your application. And high chance if you're building like a SaaS platform, you already have your own UIs for user management. Like you don't want to have to go out to some other tool to support that. So where Cerbos fits in is taking that context. So in your application code where a request comes in to do a particular action, you know who the user is, you fetch this state and about the particular user, they're in the sales team, they're in this region, etc. And then and before you do the action, you send a request out to Cerbos instance saying, I have this user, they have these attributes, they're trying to do this action on this resource that has these attributes. So the Cerbos policies themselves and the Cerbos instances as a whole are completely stateless. There's no like database, there's no backing data store that holds who does what. And the policies themselves are evaluating based upon those inputs that are coming in the request to the Cerbos instance, which avoids this kind of nasty problem in some other approaches where you have to like synchronize state from your application to the authorization layer, which is going to lead to all sorts of fun, cache misses and delays of getting things synchronized across all your different services and instances. So the Cerbos instance and the policies are comparing the inputs and coming up based on the policies with either an allow or a deny decision primarily.
So it sounds like you're kind of bringing your own user management, you're bringing your own metadata, and Cerbos is acting almost like a protocol or an API for like enforcing those things, or like a standardized way of performing those actions.
Yeah, absolutely. Because to your application now, it is a single call out. It's a single call Cerbos.check resource, principal resource action, and it comes back with an allow or deny. The actual logic behind the scenes is defined in those policy files, which can now evolve independently of your code base. Okay. And that's where the really power comes in. Because if you think sort of in a company, who really owns the requirements for authorization? It's not the developer doing the coding. It's going to be a product manager, a product owner, maybe like a security team might have some input on audit requirements and those sort of things. So where Cerbos kind of sits is the engine that the developer sort of implements to check the permissions, but it abstracts the logic out into these policy definitions, which then can be evolved on independently and potentially by the product owner directly without having to open a ticket, put it in the Jira backlog every time that the authorization logic needs to change, and they'll say come back in 3 months and it might get done.
Okay, so, can I pull a TJ here and ask and kind of like take us back a second and this is a React roundup. So as React developers, I need basically know, can I show the button on the page or not?
Absolutely.
And there's gonna be a bunch of buttons on the page, right? So do I hit your API a bunch of times? How do I make sure that I'm hitting it the same way that the back end is? Because I guaranteed like the microservice is going to be doing this as well, right? We're not going to have like the API, the AI, and the UI be like the source of truth on this, right? Absolutely. So how do what's the game plan here?
Yeah, so there's kind of two ways to do this, and we see kind of uses for both depending on how your application is architected. The most straightforward, I would say, is actually to have the permissions being returned with your data. So your React application's hitting your application API, your backend API. The API is fetching something from a database or whatever. Along with that response, it's also returning back the permissions that Cerbos says.
Sure. Here's your list of users. You can invite a new user, but you can't do delete a user or whatever.
Yeah. So you might get view allowed, delete allow, create, deny.
Right.
You know those booleans.
Right.
And then that goes down to your front end, and then inside of your React app, now you're basically conditioning a very simple conditional show or hide components based upon it. And the nice thing there, and it's again, it's kind of 2 orders removed from the front end, but when the policies change in the Cerbos instance, the Cerbos instance now starts returning different results. Your API now starts returning different allow deny decisions, and then your UI updates without you having to do any work.
Oh, I love that.
And so it's a very sort of clean, you're actually driving your UI from your backend in terms of sort of conditioning, controlling things. And then if you have multiple channels, you might have a React Web, you might have a React Native app, you might have XYZ other ways your data is consumed, much be a pure API, but it's all running off the same decisioning logic.
Yeah, and that's great because the UI isn't like asking and maybe offering a different assessment of who this person is, right, than the back end. And so you make sure that those two things are in sync. That's great. That's super clean. I love that.
And the kind of other use case of something like Cerbos, this sort of decisioning engine around who's allowed to do what, is actually, as well as actions upon data, another really common use case is like product packaging, like feature control. So user A has paid for the premium package, so they get all the features. User B might be on the standard package and they only get 3 of the 5 features, and they have a sort of quota defined. Based on what packages and what features you get, that can now just be a policy. And you have a like permissions endpoint on your API, which is again passing through those results from the Cerbos instance. And now you, in your UI layer, can actually enforce or conditionally show or hide, or show a teaser screen for different features based on, again, the business logic that's defined as configuration rather than code in that sort of policy use case and product packaging use case.
Hey, have you heard about our book club? I keep hearing from people who have heard about the book club. I'd love to see you there. This month, we are talking about Docker Deep Dive. That's the book we're reading. It's by Nigel Poulsen. And we're going to be talking about all things Docker, just how it works, how to set it up on your machine, how to go about taking advantage of all the things it offers, and using it as a dev tool to make sure that what you're running in production mirrors what you're running on your machine. And it's just one of those tools a lot of people use. Really looking forward to diving into it. That's February and March. April and May, we're going to be doing the Pragmatic Programmer. And we're going to be talking about all of the kinds of things that you should be doing in order to further your career according to that book. Now, of course, I have my own methodology for these kinds of things, but we're going to be able to dovetail a lot of them because a lot of the ideas really mesh really nicely. So if you're looking for ways to advance your career, you're looking to learn some skills that are going to get you ahead in your career, then definitely come join the book club. You can sign up at topenddevs.com/book club.
Yeah, I like that a lot because I've definitely been a part of implementations where the front end had logic to whether to show or hide the button, and then the back end had different logic, whether to like right? authorize the action. And then, maybe the mobile app has
different logic
has its own check, so it can get chaotic pretty quickly. So I like the idea of just consolidating it all in one place. It's an interesting idea.
And there might be other things that you need to send, right? Today it was account balance, and now we're adding some other conditional, right? And so the UI would have to go and oh wait, hold on, there's new stuff to send, blah 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 blah. This is all contained. I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah, and there's some sort of future feature sets we're working on to sort of streamline the in-browser policy checks, because not all things necessarily require a round trip to the server. If you're just conditionally rendering buttons and you've already got the data in browser, for example, for a detail screen, you can maybe save a round trip. And there's ways that we're working on at the moment to actually do embeddable authorization as a module inside of your front end stack based on the same source of truth, without having to necessarily return extra data from the API. But that's coming soon.
I'm interested to hear more about the testing that you were talking about earlier, because I'm very familiar with writing unit tests or integration tests inside of an application using JSON and things like Jest or different testing frameworks. So how do you test Cerbos?
Yeah, so you have your policies, this resource type, these are the actions, here are the conditions that must be met for each action to be allowed. And then in a very similar format, it's a YAML definition, you define some example principles, some example resources, and then Cerbos will actually go and test every combination of resource and principle and action and do a full matrix testing. So you end up with that grid, principle, action, for a principle resource, what actions are allowed for each. And then you simply say for, page for resource 1, allow every action read should be allowed, action delete should be denied, action create should be allowed, and Cerbos will actually run all those iterations through your actual policies and give you a test output very similar to what you get from Jest and other testing frameworks that says this test passed, this has failed, here are the things that need looking at. And the beauty there is when you do evolve your business logic, this will be there to kind of catch when things maybe haven't changed as you expected, and you may have accidentally stuck a wild card in there, and God forbid everyone has access to do everything. This would catch things early on, and you can fix them before go anywhere near production.
Nice.
So I'm curious, Cerbos is open source. What was the reasoning behind that decision, and how does that end up working out from a business perspective?
Yeah. We get asked this a lot. It's a very obvious question when you look at something like this. So our view of the world, and this is from our previous experience at various companies, is for something like this, 99.9% of our competition is a developer going and writing that logic block themselves. And, you end up writing it 5, 6, 7 times. You go over and over and over again. So our view is, let's get the core, the engine of Cerbos, something that is as simple as possible for a developer to just pluck off the shelf, plug into their app, and not write that logic themselves. So that's why we've taken that approach. It's Apache 2 license. You can use it as and where you wish. You can fork the code if you want. You can embed it. It's completely open that way. Because we just want to make sure no one has to reinvent the wheel of authorization, because really that's what you end up doing over and over and over again. So that's how we've been set up, and how that affects us kind of as a business. We're venture backed. We've got some great VCs backing us on this, and we're very fortunate to have that backing. But where we're going with this is that the core is the engine that's going to power everything we're doing. So Cerbos is a business. Where we're going next is actually, as I was saying earlier, the actual requirements for authorization aren't with the developer. They're with a product owner, a product manager, some other parts of the business, who aren't necessarily going to be happy about living in YAML files or writing tests and those sort of things. So using the Cerbos core, what's out there today as the engine and the component that is the enforcement of policies, we're building a commercialized management layer that sits on top, a control plane, as it were. So this will be a UI-based workflow where you can start bringing maybe those less technical people in your team to actually start defining and managing policies through a UI, which can be much more user-friendly, let's say, than living in YAML files, and then a whole sort of suite of tools around that to support it. So things like running the tests, and managed CI pipeline for compiling and distributing those policies to all your Cerbos instances that are running out in your infrastructure. Tooling around letting you know the impact of a change. So, based on this change you're proposing, previously where you had 5,000 actions allowed, it's now going to be only 3,000 actions allowed. Is that as you expect? And these kind of things. And there's a whole kind of roadmap we have out around when it comes to compliance and regulatory needs, making sure that you have the proper audit logs and audit trails and UIs for actually inspecting those. Having gone through ISO 27001 compliance a few times, and being the guy that got dragged into a room every year in the basement by an auditor and had to demonstrate our access controls. It sucks. So we're solving for that, and it's actually nice building a product that solves for pain I experience myself on a regular basis. But everything we're building kind of in that world will sit on this open source core. So there's no special hooks. There won't be a commercial fork of Cerbos. It will be a layer that sits on top, and the interface it speaks over is again going to be open source. Cerbos itself is written in Go. It's gRPC, protobuf definitions for everything. So the exact same interface that we'll be using to build the Cerbos control plane, you could hook into yourself if you wanted to integrate it with your existing controls as well. Hold
up. Do I have to talk gRPC?
If you're in Node or JavaScript, we have SDKs that kind of hide all that.
God.
There's an interface. There is a REST API layer on top of it as well as the gRPC.
Sorry, I just do gRPC every day. It hurts. It literally hurts.
The core API is gRPC, but there is a REST layer on top.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think it's a super smart business model, because I think you're right. It's sort of, in a sense, like what developers want is the convenience, but it's going to be hard to convince developers to pay for something like this, because you're always going to fight but I can just write this myself with some if checks and write some basic stuff. But the enterprise use case is really appealing, because they will pay for this to integrate with their whole Microsoft suite that they've already got, and the user management software and the auditing and security aspects of this too. I could see a lot of potential. So I think it's a pretty smart setup.
well, time will tell, but we hope so. And it's not just like the actual writing policies that, if you're a developer, you're happy doing. To run a service like this in production, you're also going to worry about log collection, metrics. You need to go, like, the audit logs that come out, like, where do you send those to? If you're happy running the Elk stack with Elasticache and all those fun tools, all the Elastic cache servers on top, and Kibana and all that sort of stuff, off you go. Great. Cerbos is cloud native. It exposes Prometheus metrics. It does open telemetry. It outputs standardized JSON line logs. Great. Don't want to run that yourself, or don't want to run a CI pipeline? that's where we'll have a solution, that you can just drop in and take all that workload off you. And so you can really focus on delivering the core value of your product.
Well, speaking as somebody who has been on products where we get a request from one of our product managers to allow extra users, and it is literally just putting in a new user ID into a file. That would be so great if developers didn't have to worry about that and product managers could add new users as they wanted.
Yeah, I've been in your shoes on both as a developer and as a product person, and like I said, we're just trying to get as much of the workload off the team and allow you to focus on the core value of your system.
TJ has something?
No, I'm just looking over it's super interesting. I just really like the model, so I'm just perusing your documentation. I like your logo quite a bit.
We get that a lot.
To take a turn from the serious authentication talk. If you're not, so it's the name of it's Cerbos, so you can find them on GitHub pretty easily. The logo is pretty amazing. I have to know if there's a story behind this.
I think we haven't quite agreed on a single story for this, but Cerbos, brain, three-headed dog, Cerbi, that's kind of where we landed on it. Affectionately known, our logo is our Cerbi, but
that's a great logo.
That's
so cute.
It's quite nice. I say we go and we go to a lot of developer conferences. I'm going to be at Native Security Con next week, in fact, depending when this goes out. We did Web Summit last year as well, and I think about 50% of the people that we spoke to just came up to the booth and say, "Love your logo." But we always have loads of stickers to give away.
Yeah. Oh, no, what? You need a sticker for sure.
I will send you some stickers.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so one question that I have is, if I wanted to get started with Cerbos, what is your recommendation for somebody who's new to it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have kind of multiple avenues in, depending on whether you're someone that learns by doing or learn by reading. If you're a kind of a doer, we have a load of different starter projects in different languages and frameworks. We have like a Next.js app, we have a Nux demo, we have a Svelte Kit demo as well, which gives you a full setup, server, front end, Cerbos instance, policies, and you can experiment with that. You can find all that on the ecosystem page on cerbos.dev. If you want to just dive in and start working with policies directly, we have an online playground, which is play.cerbos.dev, which allows you to write in your browser, prototype, test, evaluate policies, and it gives you real-time feedback of the impact of that particular policy. There's some example projects as well, like an expenses tracking application I've mentioned a few times, that's in there. And then if you're one that's more for reading, we have very extensive documentation on the doc site, so docs.cerbos.dev. And there's a kind of a multi-part getting started guide that walks you through from nothing on your dev machine to a fully deployed environment at the other end, having written policies, evolved them, taking advantage of all the different kind of functionality. So that's kind of the tooling, that's kind of the resources we have out there. There's a whole YouTube series as well if you want to hear more of my voice, unfortunately. And the kind of the final thing to kind of call out as well is the way we recommend you start introducing this into an existing project, because this comes up quite a lot, is start off with just sitting down with whoever has the requirements for authorization and getting down on usually a spreadsheet, resources, roles, who can do what, and you end up with this kind of tick box, and you very quickly realize that some of these are conditional. So you end up with true, false, maybe, or sometimes in some of the cells. And that really helps everyone kind of align on that. And we actually have a whole guide of how to go from that spreadsheet through to actually writing policies away. And we recommend starting with like just one of the resource types in your system, because you can incrementally adopt Cerbos. You don't have to go and rip out everything and start from scratch. If you're building an HR system, start with just the expenses section and you have an expense resource, and take that if-else logic that's in your code, replace that with a single call out to a Cerbos instance, have a single policy type of expense, and then build up from there. And if at any point you get stuck or you're not sure what to do, we actually run free workshops as well. You can just book on our website and you'll get myself or one of the other members of the team, and we'll interactively go through your use case, build it in the playground with you, all for free, to help you kind of get up and running and help you start your journey on decoupling authorization from your application.
That's really nice.
Yeah. That's a real selling point. Yeah.
Not good.
So what's coming up next for Cerbos? What do you have in the works, or what sort of stuff are you looking into?
Yeah, so on the open core side of things, we have always been kind of iterating based on the feedback. So recently we've added support for some more metrics, some more telemetry. We've had a few community contributions as well around that, and also kind of enhancing the types of conditions that you can do. So we recently added like hierarchies and hierarchical functions. So if you have like a nested tree of data, you can actually use Cerbos policies to kind of inspect that tree and make a decision. And that's kind of a constant iteration. And I mentioned this before, we're working as well on this Cerbos cloud commercial offering, which is that UI-based workflow for managing and evolving policies. We are starting to test this with some of our early users, and we'll be opening up that to kind of more users over the next couple of months. If you want to find out more, you can register interest at cerbos.dev/next. It's just a very simple form to put in, and we'll be in touch to kind of get you up and running. But that gives you that full end-to-end managed environment for getting your policies in, defining them, evolving them, compiling them, distributing them, and then getting back the audit logs and the other tooling around it. And that's kind of where we're going over this year, really, to enable that and bring those other personas and other roles into the world of authorization, allowing them to own it and much more sort of self-service around it rather than have to go and rely on developers all the time.
Very cool. I love the design of the whole site. I was just looking at your next site, and I was also looking at your playground. It's super well done. So nice work on that as well.
Yeah, again, like everything we're doing is just making it the nicest sort of developer experience that you can. We know there's a lot more we need to do, but that really has been our focus, because at the end of the day, we're competing against building it yourself.
Right.
Making it as easy as possible.
Are there architecture guidelines on there? Like you mentioned that really great, basically return permissions as part of, or not permissions, but I guess, permissions, I guess.
Yeah.
As part of the payload. Is that up on there? Is like, hey, this is our recommended architecture.
Yeah, there's a lot of documentation. We also are publishing, at this rate, it's about a guide a week on our blog of different architectures and ways of deploying Cerbos, way of defining your policies, sort of everything from very technical through to more philosophical ways of approaching authorization. So, just trying to firstly get the word out that there is a difference between authentication and authorization, going back to kind of where we started this conversation, and then the different approaches to do it and how you can sort of fix your mental model of how these things all stick together. And obviously doing conversations like this, as well as trying to get more people to figure out where this sits in their architecture.
Well, Alex, this has been great. Is there anything about Cerbos, or really anything at this point that we've missed? Anything else you want to make sure to share or flag or make sure our listeners know about?
Yeah, there's one interesting challenge with decoupling authorization, which you don't really realize until you try and implement it yourself, which is what we kind of refer to as the listing problem. So it's all very well having a resource. You've hit some API, you've got your object, and you want to check whether you can do an action on it or not. But imagine if you're trying to present like an index page or a listing page of all your employees or all your comments or all your expenses. There could be hundreds, thousands, millions of these records in your database. And the bad way of doing it is to actually get every single one of those records, do a check for each of them, and return maybe the 5 or none that user is actually authorized to access. So Cerbos has something that we believe is fairly unique, which we call a query plan. So this is kind of like a partial evaluation where you say to Cerbos, I have this principal, so this user, this ID, these attributes, etc., who's trying to do the view action on the resource kind of expense. So you're not giving like a concrete resource, you're just saying the type of resource. And this is a secondary endpoint Cerbos. And Cerbos will give you back what we call a query plan, which is the smallest set of predicates that you need to apply to your data fetching layer, be it a where clause or like a Mongo filter, to return just the instances from your data storage layer that user would have permission to access.
Wow, that's neat.
So inside the Cerbos engine, we, based on the context we have, so we know the principal, we know all their resource, we know all their attributes, and based on the policies for that resource kind, Cerbos gives you back one of 3 results. It says always allow, because there's like some wild card and this person should always have access. Always deny, because there's some rule that says this person should never have access to this resource kind. Or a conditional. And that conditional is an abstract syntax tree, an AST of conditions that are defined in a very standardized way, which says this field must be equal to this value, this attribute must be true, this attribute must appear in this list, etc. And it does lots of deduplication and optimization in that query plan. And you'll get back into your code base those filters, and you can adapt that into a where clause of Mongo filter, an API lookup, whatever makes sense, because it is an abstract tree. We have pre-built adapters for things like Prisma and SQL Alchemy that convert it automatically into filter, but it's abstract, so you can plug it to anything. And this is, as far as we're concerned, the only way you can really do scalable, decoupled authorization, because you're only going to be fetching from your database or your data storage the instances that that user would have access to, still based on those policies which are being managed by your product your product owner in a decoupled kind of approach. And that is a component of Cerbos, the query plan, which truly helps you build a scalable, decoupled, stateless authorization architecture for your systems.
That is very cool.
Well, excellent
to build.
Well, Alex, this has been a lot of fun, and I'll just encourage people, if you even if you have no interest in authentication or authorization, you have to go to cerbos.dev just to look at the logo. And I mean, if you do have authorization and authentication needs, or I'm sorry, I should know this by now. If you have authorization needs, you should check out cerbos.dev.
Don't mess that up, man.
I've been listening. I've got it under control, Jack.
Is it is it A something N versus A something N, or is it like how many letters?
Authentication is like auth-N, and then authorization, depending if you're American or British, is either auth-Z or auth-Z.
Oh.
Hey, this is Charles Max Wood. I just wanted to talk really briefly about the Top End Devs membership and let you know what we've got coming up this month. So in February, we have a whole bunch of workshops that we're providing to members. You can go sign up at topenddevs.com/sign up. If you do, you're going to get access to our book club. We're reading Docker Deep Dive, and we're going to be going into Docker and how to use it and things like that. We also have workshops on the following topics, and I'm just going to dive in and talk about what they are real quick. First, it's how to negotiate a raise. I've talked to a lot of people that they're not necessarily keen on leaving their job, but at the same time, they also want to make more money. And so we're going to talk about the different ways that you can approach talking to your boss or HR or whoever about getting that raise that you want and having it support the lifestyle you want. That one's going to be on February 7th, February 9th, we're going to have a Career Freedom Mastermind. Basically, you show up, you talk about what's holding you back, what you dream about doing in your career, all of that kind of stuff. And then we're going to actually brainstorm together. You and whoever else is there and I, all of us are going to brainstorm on how you can get ahead. The next week on the 14th, we're going to talk about how to grow from junior developer to senior developer, the kinds of things you need to be doing, how to do them, that kind of a thing. On the 16th, we're going to do a Visual Studio or VS Code tips and tricks. On the 21st, we're going to talk about how to build a software course. And on the 23rd, we're going to talk about how to go freelance. And then finally, on February 28th, we're going to talk about how to set up a YouTube channel. So those are the meetups that we're going to have along with the book club. And I hope to see you there. That's going to be at topenddevs.com/sign up.
Excellent. Well, with that, why don't we move into our picks, where we just pick something fun, shows, kitchen gadgets from around our lives. And Paige, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, I will kick us off for this week. So my pick is going to be a portable monitor screen that I actually got for Christmas. And I had the chance to take it with me on a trip last week. And it is from Amazon, and it's called the Arzopa, ARZOPA portable monitor. And what's so nice about it, because I actually got this recommendation from a coworker who brought it on a work trip, is that it is, I think it's under, maybe it's half a pound. So it's like 8 ounces or something. It's very lightweight. It's a 16-inch monitor, and it connects to my MacBook with just one USB-C cable. It doesn't need a power source. It just plugs in, and it's pretty much good to go. So, you know, if you're a person who travels at all for work, or you just want an extra monitor because maybe your laptop screen's a little bit small, this is definitely something that I would recommend. It folds up. It has a cover. You can kind of jut the cover out so that it will actually hold the monitor up or make it stand up at different angles. It's really nice. And it's not extremely expensive like some of the ones that I've seen. So it's maybe $150 to $170.
Oh, that's not bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It was really reasonable compared to some of the other ones that I've been looking at in the past. So, you know, if you want something like this, I would definitely say check it out. It was pretty handy to have, and it was very easy to get started with.
Does it come with a cover to like protect the screen, or?
It does. And the cover actually has little hinges in it. So when you're using it, you can just kind of unhook the cover, because I guess it's probably magnets that keep it in place, and then use that as the stand and just have it at different angles.
I'll have to check this out, because I always get annoyed. I'm a multiple monitor person, but obviously with traveling, it's like, it's hard. Historically, you've just been kind of out of luck. So I'll have to check this out.
It's like you always imagine I'm going to work in the hotel, you know, after the day. And it's like, they get there and you're like, oh, I'm at the laptop. Oh, God, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just
When
waiting
you
for
hunch
the
over
AR
your tiny
glasses.
monitor.
Yeah.
Put on the glasses. I've got monitors everywhere. That's the future I want.
That would be cool.
Jack, what picks do you have for us?
Sure. So I've been obsessing on cleaning my desk and getting it with absolutely nothing on it, like the zero desk thing, except for like monitor mounts and that sort of stuff. And that hasn't, I've involved now a lot of 3D printing. So I've been like 3D printing brackets for my headphones and all of that kind of stuff. But of course, nothing off the shelf matches my stuff. So I need to create it on the fly. And like, I was going around trying to find a good CAD tool that was free, and it's always like, it's whatever. There's a whole bunch of things. And I finally found one, Autodesk 360, Fusion 360. Turns out it's free for you, just basically personal use for making like a headphone holder or whatever. And it's just great. It's really fun to actually make some model on your computer, just like take out the calipers and figure out how to make it, right? And then draft it up. And then literally an hour later, it's in your hand. I think it's just if you got a 3D printer, it's just so cool. So been really geeking out on that lately. And now my desk is like perfectly clean. It's great.
So are you designing like hooks? Like you say headphone stand, is this like mounted under your desk or?
Well, I've got a boom arm that holds my microphone. So I might as well use that, but to clip onto it, was kind of a pain because it's got it's a circle, right? So I ended up creating like a thing that would wrap around a circle and then kind of come out, and then you'd hang your headphones on that. It's very nice.
Cool.
And that this is one. I mean, there's like everything. I've got my video recorder, my audio recorder, all of that stuff. It's like my desk was fairly messy.
It's the life of a YouTube superstar, right? That's the downside. You have so much stuff. Yes.
Right.
As long as it's out of frame, it's okay.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. Although so many people are doing like like Alex has got the big mic. Well, everybody's got no, actually, Paige, you don't. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, Paige is right below. Yeah, just outside. There you go. Nice.
Things you got to do for audio quality.
Oh, yeah.
All right. My pick for this week is going to be National Geographic, and specifically their newsletter, which my wife got me interested in because she had gotten into it. And basically, it's a newsletter with all their articles that they put out, which I found are incredibly high quality and very interesting, especially if you're into historical things. They do a lot of like, what's the latest going on in archaeology and different animal studies and whatnot. And you get like 5 free articles a month, and then you can sign up. That's sort of their business model. You can sign up for a monthly subscription if you end up reading enough of it. But even if you just sign up for the free newsletter and just like peruse the headings, I find it pretty interesting. Although you can lose a lot of time that way. So if you're trying to avoid spending time reading random articles on the internet, maybe not for you, but if you're interested in that sort of stuff, I've enjoyed it quite a bit.
Cool.
And Alex, what picks do you have for us?
Yeah, so going on what Paige was saying about traveling and having second monitors, etc. I spend way too much time on airplanes, and I think something like 50-something flights last year.
Oh,
and
no.
One thing that kind of annoys me is I've got my AirPods or I've got my like Bluetooth headphones, but occasionally there's actually something I want to watch that's on the in-flight entertainment thing. So my pick is something called an RHA wireless flight adapter, which is a little Bluetooth box which you plug into the headphone port on the in-flight entertainment, and then you connect your Bluetooth headphones to that.
Ooh,
so I can use my Bose headphones.
That is clever.
To plug in to Bluetooth to this box, which then this box is plugged into the in-flight entertainment, and it's still a wireless, etc., etc. Charges off USB-C. It's a very tiny little box. Fits in my backpack, and yeah, you can enjoy a decent quality audio rather than having to use the airline's little tiny $2 headphones that they give you. So you might actually be able to hear the film.
I'm such a klutz, though. I foresee myself kind of knocking it off or ripping it as I'm trying to get up to go to the bathroom or something like that. I mean, the seats are always so tiny.
Yeah. The nice thing here, the box itself is battery powered, so it literally just slides in and just sits kind of flush.
Oh,
the seats,
wow.
And it's got battery in it. You just charge it with USB-C. And so you are truly wireless. You're not tethered to your seat. So when I'm the same. When you do get up to go to the bathroom or whatever, you
could actually still be listening to your show.
Well, all that.
Yeah, I mean, why not? Really,
you're queuing up.
Right, exactly. There's always a line for the bathroom.
Yeah, indeed. So one of my various travel must-haves.
Very
That's cool.
Well, excellent. Alex, this has been a ton of fun chatting. My last question for you is, if people want to follow you, whatever the case may be, is there a good spot to go for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Follow me on Twitter, if that's still around by the time this comes out. I'm just at Alex Olivier. It's AlexOlivier. Yeah, happy
Excellent. Well, it was awesome chatting with you, and see everybody next week.
Bye, everybody.
All right. See you then.